All right. Hey there. Welcome, everybody, to the Money Club. I am your hostess with the mostest, Lisa Duke, and my guest today is Beth Agnello. And I will let her tell you a little bit about her background and where she is. Welcome, Beth.
Thanks, Lisa. My name is Beth Agnello. I am an hourly fee-only financial planner located in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. I'm an investment advisor rep with Garrett Investment Advisors, which is a fee-only SEC registered investment advisor. And my own practice is called Fairwinds Financial Advice.
Gotcha.
So go ahead.
Yep. And just to say this up front, I know in your industry, there are a lot of rules, which I think probably came A, in response to abuses, and B, from a good place. The problem is that sometimes the people who know the most about these topics are the least able to speak freely about them. So tell us a little bit just about what your compliance requirements are for today's purposes.
Okay, so here's my small print. It will be very clear. So anything that we discuss this evening, anything that I say will really just be for general information or educational purposes. So the only people that I give advice to are clients, and I have knowledge of their specific needs and circumstances so that I can give them advice. Exactly. So what I'd say is any financial decisions that you're going to make, you should first review with your own financial advisor or planner, your tax person, your accountant, or your attorney, someone who's aware of your specific circumstances.
Exactly. And that's not just a way to make sure that people have to pay you to get information. It's because these issues really are quite complex. So there's not just a boilerplate, everybody, well, I think maybe everybody should pay down debt. I'll feel comfortable saying that. If you've got high interest rate credit cards, I think everybody should pay that down. But in general, it's very hard to make those sweeping statements because especially as you start to build wealth, you have some investments. It's very particular based on your tax situation, your goals, your targets that you're trying to hit. So you can't just say everybody should do X, Y, Z. You really have to tailor that recommendation for that specific person's situation, correct?
I couldn't agree more. It was funny. I saw an article in one of the financial journals recently, and it was, 7 things that financial planners say that are wrong. And I had to laugh because these were the kinds of things that journalists want you to give them general rules that they can write about, okay, that work for everybody, but there aren't any. So what financial planners do, like, you do, Lisa, in your work, is you're working with individuals about their specific circumstances, and something that might work great for one person would be ill-advised for someone else. So I'm not trying to be coy tonight, but I know my answers to a lot of the questions probably won't satisfy folks, because when you're giving general information for an average person, there are no average people.
Amen. And none of us think we're the average person anyway. All of us think it's like the Lake effect, right?
We're all above average, aren't we?
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's start with, and let me say right up front, there are not too many clear lines. There may be some overlap. Not every coach or planner or advisor does the same thing as other people within their job category. And there probably is some overlap between different people with different titles. But I find there's a lot of confusion, especially with the term financial coach being new. People don't really understand, okay, well, if I have this scenario, who do I go to? So can you explain a little bit about what you as an hourly fee-only planner do for clients, the kind of questions that are appropriate to ask you, the kind of situations you work on?
Sure. And here's the thing, again, what I tell you will not be the case for all financial planners. And, as you suggested, this is a kind of confusing world. Anybody can use the title financial advisor or financial planner. Anyone who wants to. So there are folks who do all kinds of different things and who are compensated in all kinds of different ways who do this. I am, as I mentioned, an hourly financial planner. I work with clients on projects that we together have outlined that are based on what their current needs are, and that range from anything from doing retirement planning to working on savings and developing an emergency fund to deciding whether they need to cut expenses to figuring out how to fund college for their children. It crosses the gamut. What I don't do is manage investments for clients. So while I do give clients who request it investment advice, I never enter any orders, manage any funds for clients directly.
Gotcha.
And the focus of my practice is not on the investment piece, which is what most folks think about if you say you're a financial planner or a financial advisor. Oh, you're all about investments. Not really. It's a part of my practice, but it's not the focus of my practice.
Gotcha. Yeah, makes sense. And we've kind of touched a couple of times on how you get compensated. And I will say, people in the financial services space are probably a little bit more comfortable talking about money than regular people. So you all as viewers should feel very comfortable asking people in our industry, how do you get paid? My husband likes to say, if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. And that's not always a bad thing. In our IT consulting practice, we get margin off of the software that we resell. And clients, I think, understand that, right? We buy it wholesale, we sell it retail. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, but I think it's important to understand and to make sure you get what you're looking for and that you understand who that person works for, if they work for an insurance company or if they work for you. The other thing that I think is really important to outline is my impression of most advisors and planners is that they do work on managing the investments in the sense of they want you to roll all your money, or at least everything that's outside your current employer's plan, into an account that they go into, they manage, they help set up. So I think you're a really good fit for a lot of the people maybe in the FIRE community, Financial Independence Retire Early, who want to DIY it. They've got their Vanguard account, they've got, their investment philosophy, they have everything set up, but they might want some, another important thing too is typically when you come in as a client to an advisor or a planner, the expectation on the service provider's part is that they own that relationship pretty much for life. Like you're married unless you break up. And so the expectation is that you'll be paying every year, or they'll be managing your account and paying themselves out of your account every year. Whereas what you do is very unusual because it's a specific project where they come in and they say, hey, we're DIYers. We want to take care of it ourselves. We have some really strong opinions based on things we've heard on podcasts or blogs, but we do want a third party to come in, maybe settle a debate between a husband and a wife, or just review everything from a professional standpoint. So you can kind of see, okay, the way you're set up made a lot of sense from when you set it up at 25, but now that you're 45 and talking about early retirement, you might want to shift some things around. So I just think, again, it's very important when someone is engaging with a planner or an advisor to understand, how do you get paid? How long do you think the engagement is going to be for? What are we going to work on? And what's involved, so that they understand, like if they just want a one-time review, then a typical advisor or planner may not be a good fit. If they want an ongoing relationship, presumably they can do that with you, but they just need to understand it's not pay once and then you help them forever.
You're absolutely right that financial people are much more comfortable talking about money than the average folks, but not all financial people will tell you out front if you don't ask, oh, by the way, here's how I'm compensated. And it is really important that you as the consumer know and that you're comfortable with that. And Lisa, you are correct that most folks who call themselves financial planners or financial advisors do make their money by managing the assets of their clients. So client comes on board, moves their assets to an account with the planner's custodian, and the planner charges a fee that's based on a percentage of those assets on an ongoing basis. Okay. And that's the way the industry has evolved. And when I was thinking about financial planning, that particular piece just didn't work for me because, well, first of all, it's very investment focused. If I'm telling you, I can only work with you if you give me your investments to manage myself, that's suggesting this piece is so important that I need to do it for you, okay? The kind of folks that I work with, that I like working with, are people who say, no, I need some advice, but you know what? If there are trades that need to be entered or accounts that need to be set up, I'm good with doing that, and I'm going to watch over that. Those are the clients who are a fit for me. But it's also that you need to make sure that you're understanding what you're paying and for the period of time you're paying. Some folks think that if a planner is hourly, like I am, and honestly, I don't do hourly planning. It's not like you call me up and say, Beth, I got 15 minutes worth of questions. I'll pay for 15 minutes of your time. Because clearly, I need to understand enough about you so that I can give you advice. It's not just answering questions off the cuff. But the way I would typically work with a client is, you come to me, you tell me what your current concerns are. We get to know each other a little bit and talk that over. And then I'm going to tell you, look, here are the things that you're telling me about that I think we need to work on and the things that need to be addressed. And based on my hourly rate, it's going to cost this much for us to work together on this. I'm not saying I'm firing you at the end of that, but I'm giving you the opportunity to decide, oh, yep, I'm willing to pay that to get peace of mind and the information I need on these particular topics that we've defined together. And then if later on down the road, and who knows, later on down the road for you could be 6 months because your situation changes, or 6 years because you don't have any questions, you may want to come back. We already have a relationship, and we pick up there with what's important now. And as certainly, Lisa, you know, and most of us can imagine, we change all through our lives, and financial planning is a process. Things that fit at one point don't fit later. The world changes, you change. There is no truly one and done. The important thing for me is that clients have an opportunity at the beginning of every engagement to say, yep, I value this, and this is what I want to get done right now. As a planner, I've got lots of ideas about the things that everyone should do. I wish every client would show up saying, hey, I'd like you to help me get financial and healthcare powers of attorney in place and get my will set up. Well, you know what? No one ever comes and asks for that. Every client I work with probably needs that. But you know what? I'm not going to charge you for talking to you about that if it's not your interest. You will get a free prod on that subject, but does that make sense?
Yeah, you're going to take care of the project, but then the nagging is complimentary.
Yes, the nagging is complimentary. Comes
Just
along.
like with mom.
It is a little bit like that. And you know what? I will suggest things to clients. Hey, this is not one of the things that you came in to talk about, but I want to let you know this is something I think you should address, and for these reasons. And then, you know what? You're an adult. You decide whether that's a road you want to go down and whether you want to engage to work on that.
Got it. Okay. I'm going to jump now over to some of the questions that were posted in the Money Club in the past. The first question is, so let's assume somebody, they kind of have their house in order. They've been doing a good job saving for retirement. How do they know when it's time to invest after-tax money outside of a retirement account? And is there a general strategy you recommend for people for how to start doing that?
So, first of all, it's ideal for folks to go into retirement having investments that are not pre-tax, okay? So which would mean either your brokerage account where you've put after-tax dollars in, or a Roth IRA, Roth 401k, where you could draw money out and it's not going to be taxable. When you're retired, you're going to want to have both kinds of accounts so that you can manage your tax situation. That means you're going to need to save someplace other than just your tax-advantaged employer account. When do you start doing that is a good question, because for most of us, it's important that you make sure you have cash savings taken care of first
Mm-hmm.
before you start doing any other type of investing. And most folks call it an emergency fund. I like calling it a curveball fund, because we're going to need to spend money out of it for things that aren't necessarily emergencies, but were bumps in life that really weren't planned either. That has to be in place before we start thinking about doing outside investing. This is a much easier sell today after the craziness in the market earlier this year. But trust me, this time last year when I was talking to people about holding things in, for example, in a, high yield, not really high, but highest you can get yield online savings account for a curveball fund, people didn't want to do it because they didn't want to forego the types of returns you were getting in the stock market over however many years. Nevertheless, we all need to have that cash buffer that's going to carry us through some decent period of time. And here's your rule of thumb, different for everybody, but somewhere from 6 months to a year as a minimum of expenses that would cover everything. And a year ago this time, most of the folks that I know who work in higher ed said, oh, my job's secure, I'm okay with 3 months. Well, the world looks a little bit different in 2020, and everybody wishes that they had that much cash.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and what I find too is, there's probably a more elegant way to say this, but crappy things tend to stack. You're much more likely to lose your job when the economy is down, which also tends to be when the stock market is down.
Yes.
So if you lose your job and you need cash and the market is down, that's the worst time to sell. So I almost think of that as, it's like insurance for your investments. It's money that it's like a airbag or like bubble wrap. It's protecting your investments from you.
Well, and that's a good way to think about it, because you're absolutely right. It's likely that when you lose your job, the stock market's going to be down. And if you have to liquidate at the bottom of the market, that is a bad thing. Your cash savings protect you in that exact kind of scenario. And I find that once people bite the bullet and are willing to do it and stop thinking about it as something and realize this is something that's going to keep its dollar value. It's not even going to keep up with inflation. That's not its purpose. It's readily accessible. It's there when you need it. It actually does give folks peace of mind to know that they have that buffer. It's critical.
Makes sense. So, all right, another question that came in, and it wasn't very elaborate, but it said self-employed retirement accounts.
Sure.
My answer to that is yes. But can you go sort of the difference between, I know for a while, SEP IRA was kind of an easy way to do that. I've heard now solo 401k can be a better option if it's just, if you don't have employees. Can you talk about, like, let's say we have a small business, no employees, it's like a solopreneur or a solopreneur plus spouse. What are the differences? How do you pick between those?
Okay, and we're talking about folks here who are only employed in their own business, because it's different if it's a side gig business and you're covered by an employer plan. Okay.
Gotcha.
But, honestly, I like to start out with the easiest stuff, and the very easiest things, if you are self-employed, are, first of all, make sure that you're funding an IRA, either a traditional IRA or a Roth IRA, that you're putting in that $6,000 a year, or the extra $1,000 if you're 50 or over, and you can, okay? Then, do you have more money that you can save for retirement? If you do, the SEP IRA is still the easiest next step. Okay, and one of the beautiful things about a SEP IRA is you can set it up and fund it up until the time your taxes are due. So for example, for 2020, I would have at least until April 15th of 2021 to set it up and to fund it. And if I get an extension to October of 2021, I can make my 2020 contribution up until that extension date. That's a nice thing for small business owners who if they're working on a calendar year, at the end of the calendar year, may not even be sure what they can contribute, because SEP IRA contributions are going to be based on either what you pay yourself, and most people who are self-employed and only have themselves are not paying themselves payroll. They're dependent on what the net income is of their business, and that would be the basis for your SEP contribution. So max out your SEP, okay? Max out your regular IRA, max out your SEP, and then I would suggest thinking about a solo 401k. If, as you said, you have to be the only person in the business except for potentially a spouse. Okay.
Gotcha.
So
yeah,
spouses can contribute.
Let's go one step bigger. Let's say I have a guy who owns a business and he brings on one employee, not a contract person, but an employee. So now he can't really do SEP or solo 401k. Is that true? Let me pause first.
That's not true. You can't do a solo 401k. Bringing on your first employee, your solo 401k is gone. You can do a SEP. The thing with a SEP is that if you are going to contribute 10% of net income on your own behalf, you have to make a same percentage contribution for your employee. Now, if you're on payroll and you're paying yourself $100,000 and you're paying your employee $20,000, your 10% is going to be a lot bigger than theirs. Okay. But you can't discriminate at all. Whatever that percentage is has to be the same. So could you still use it with one or two employees? You could, but recognize you're making contributions and they're going into those employees' IRAs and they are vested and gone immediately.
Okay. Gotcha. That's important.
So that is important. And so when you take on employees, then the world starts to look a little bit different.
Okay. And that might be then when you start looking at a more traditional 401k plan where people can or cannot contribute and you can or cannot match, and those are easier to set up than they used to be, correct?
They are easier to set up than they used to be. There are a number of businesses that specialize in actually making 401ks more accessible for smaller businesses and those with a small number of employees. Before you decide to do a 401k, you can look at a simple IRA. And a simple IRA, you do need to make matching contributions for employees that opt in, but it may still end up being a better choice than a 401k. Once you get into a 401k, you are responsible for choosing the investment options, okay? What some of these companies are doing that are working with small businesses to help them offer 401ks is saying, hey, guess what? We'll do that piece for you. But oh man, you can't do a halfway job on that, or you could end up in trouble if you were offering crappy investment choices for your employees. And that's a distinction once you go to that 401k and have employees. So there's also a lot more reporting.
Okay, so here's another question, and I know the short answer is it depends, but maybe you can give people some things to think about.
Maybe.
So the question is, how much do you need for retirement if your home is paid off?
Okay. Yeah, the $64,000 question. Well,
more than that.
Well, if you can live on $1 a year, go for it. So, unfortunately, this is one of those equations where we have far too many unknowns. So if you think about it, if you're headed into retirement with an investment portfolio, we don't know what the market's going to do for over the course of your retirement. Or I don't, maybe you do, but I'm assuming that you're in the same boat I am, and you don't know either. So we have market performance, that's a big question mark. We have inflation, which is a big question mark. So I might know what it costs me to live now, but I don't know what it's going to look like 10 years from now. And then we have your longevity. We don't know when you're going to die, okay? If we knew the answers to those questions, then all we would need is to know, well, how much do you need to live on comfortably right now, okay? But we're never going to have all 4 of those questions answered. So what I would tell you is, it's important that you work on that last thing. Figure out what is going to be a reasonable budget for me in retirement, because that's a starting point, which at least allows you to test some of the other variables. Okay.
Yeah.
And it's not that straightforward to figure out what you actually need to live on, because many of us, okay, say you're a person in the fire community and you're talking about taking early retirement when you're 40. You know, you could have 60 years of retirement. You might have some idea of how you want to live at 40 and 44, but you don't really know what your life's going to look like when you're in your 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. And we do an incredibly bad job as human beings of envisioning and caring much about us projected into the future. Okay. So we need to make sure we're leaving a margin for error and recognizing that, hey, you know, maybe right now at this point in my life, I love it when I travel to stay in hostels and, you know, I'll walk, I'll cycle, I'll take the train 3rd class. Well, when you're traveling when you're 60, you may not still have a good time if you're doing those same sorts of things. And when you're 75, you may not be able to do those things. And when you're 85, you may not be able to mow your lawn and prune your bushes. And, you know, so life changes, and we need to allow for those things.
All right. Here's a great question. This is one we've been debating in our household. With more people working from home, some may be considering going down to 1 vehicle in what used to be a 2-vehicle household. How much do you save by doing that typically? A car payment, sure. How much insurance is typically saved? What other considerations should people reflect on before doing this? And if I can just kind of chime in first with my 2 cents worth, we had a conversation kind of at the beginning of this about, well, and going back even further, we were a 1-car family in Atlanta the last, I think, 2 years that we were there, which if you ask anybody from Atlanta, they will tell you it can't be done, but we did it. My husband had a little electric bike that he could ride to work. That so disturbed his coworkers that they said, you know, the company car that you have that you drive around town, you live inside the city limits. If you just want to take that home at night, like, it's cool with us. So we were able to make it work, and we just kind of planned ahead of time. If I needed the car, he needed the car. And so when we moved down here, he threw a big fit about how oppressed he was that he didn't have his own car and how he needed a car. And so I kind of gave in and we got a car. Well, now he bikes to work. I work from home. You know, we probably need a car, but we don't need 2 cars realistically. So we were all set to get rid of the older of the 2 cars. And then I realized, what if there is a hurricane? Because he needs to stay in town. He's going to be in the emergency operations center because he's, you know, first responder in terms of as much as you can first respond for IT. And then I presumably will be leaving the area to evacuate. It's like, well, hang on. It seems silly to keep the car for that one scenario, but we haven't yet been able to figure out any way around that. So I don't know. Apparently I just felt the need to share a personal anecdote, but I guess part of it is you need to think about what's my day-to-day life like, but also what are the outliers? And, you know, do I want to be trying to get an Uber in the middle of a hurricane? Does he want to be trying to ask a friend or a coworker to drop him off at home when they're trying to get home to check on their family? So I guess that would be the what other considerations.
Right.
Well,
and you know, Lisa, if I were looking at your situation, I'd say, okay, and realistically, what are you going to get for your older car? And what is it costing you to keep it insured and in running order? Because you put your finger on the convenience, okay? And yes, you're not concerned about convenience on a day-to-day basis because only one of you is commuting outside of the home, but you've foreseen that there could be these scenarios where life would be a lot different if we had only one car and not two. It's a big adjustment. Lots of folks do it. If it's important to you, absolutely think about it, particularly if you live around a city or place where it's easy to do public transportation or use an Uber. What you're going to save is going to vary a lot. You know, in my lifetime, I've owned cars in California, New York, and North Carolina. And let me tell you, in North Carolina, the cost of insurance is not even a consideration. I mean, I'm not going to tell you how many cars I have, but it's a lot because it doesn't cost anything to keep them. And I have places for them to be parked out of the weather. So I'm like, oh, I almost never use that car, but we still have it, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying everyone should do that, but two people, if you've got two cars, you feel like you're not using them, you're going to save money if you are going to carpool places you go, okay? Then you're going to save money on maintenance and fuel and that sort of thing. If what you're going to do instead is both use the car for all the things you regularly do and just sort of share time, then your only real savings are, yes, you got rid of a car payment and you got rid of the insurance cost for the second car, because you're still going to pay for fuel and you're just going to pay more maintenance on one vehicle because you're going to put a lot more miles on it. But definitely think through the convenience factor of it. How important is, how significant is car insurance in your state, and things like the annual registration and that sort of thing. And I would say before you do sell the second car, try out not using it for a good long period of time, just to make sure that you're going to be satisfied. Man, we Americans, I mean, it's right up there with owning a home. We love our vehicles, and sharing takes a different mindset.
Very true. And I would think too, you should be able to call whoever is insuring your car and say, hey, we're thinking about dropping the Honda. How much would it bring our premium down? You can look at the IRS mileage rate. It tends to change sometimes during the year, usually at the beginning of the year. And that's supposed to be an approximation of about what it costs you per mile, you know, all in gas, oil change, maintenance, that kind of thing.
Right.
So those would be some data points you could probably look at. Another thing too is if and this might be something I think about, although it sounds like kind of a hassle because we're not close to an airport and it just sounds like kind of a hassle. But one thing you could do if you're not ready to officially get rid of the car, but you don't think you need it, there are car share services where you don't have to be in the car with the stranger, like Truro, Truro is one. So you might be able to, I'm always looking for kind of what assets do I have that aren't doing anything that I could make into a stream of income. So maybe you hang on to the ownership of the car, but you rent it out. And then, you know, if a hurricane is coming, you just don't rent it out during that period of time. So that might be a way to kind of accomplish, have your cake and eat it too.
Could be, yeah.
So let's see. Next question. I am curious about the different considerations / benefits for paying off the mortgage before you retire or moving into a cash paid home around when you retire, depending if someone plans to move. So basically, I guess, eliminating the payment versus hanging on to the money.
And this is, go ahead.
Oh, she says, my dad recently sold his house and moved into a rental situation. His property taxes got so high that to rent in a high rise where the maintenance and expenses were covered was going to be not much more than his property taxes per year. My mother and stepfather recently paid off their mortgage, though, as their retirement strategy for living frugally, strategy for living frugally and living well. It seems like there are many different perspectives and strategies. Maybe the best thing to do is just pick one and do it. In the other words, not freeze and do nothing. So any thoughts on how you make that decision?
Yeah, and I'm glad we're doing this on Zoom so nobody can throw a pie at me, because just like we're questioning car ownership, I don't get far with my clients with this, but I ask people to examine their love of owning their personal home and real estate, because we as Americans think real estate is the best investment and you need to own your home or you can't get ahead. And I believe that is not true, particularly, so, this person asked, well, what should you be thinking about when you're going into retirement? I think 99% of financial planners would tell you, don't go into retirement with a mortgage, because we want you to reduce your absolutely mandatory monthly expenses so that you're not having to draw on your investment portfolio, no matter what, to meet expenses like making a mortgage payment. Now, here's the deal. If you've got loads of assets and loads of money, it doesn't matter, okay? But most of us ordinary human beings don't go into retirement in that situation, so it's great not to have a mortgage. And this plays into the desire of lots of Americans today to age in place. And I will question that as well. I try to encourage folks, go into retirement with flexibility, okay? You think you want to age in place, you've got your mortgage paid off, so your expenses are down, okay, but 10 years from now, 20 years from now, things can happen and this can look different. Try to be flexible about how you look at things, because you may not be staying in that home until you die. I like the rental option and the possibility of having liquidated the real estate before you go into retirement. Now, does that mean you've got monthly rent expenses? Absolutely. But it's easy for you to change, relatively speaking, where you live and how you live as you want to. Your kids move someplace else, guess what? You can move there to be closer to them. You don't need a 3-bedroom anymore? Well, you can move to a 2-bedroom. You want to live by the beach? You go and live by the beach. And another beautiful thing about living in a rented as opposed to an owned property when you're in retirement, particularly for folks who are going to retire to a more traditional retirement age, is as you get older and the maintenance and care gets to be a bigger burden, you just take that factor out of the equation,
Yeah, so true. One of the wisest things that I heard recently, I forget who said it, but they said, with a mortgage, and any homeowners out there will feel this, with a mortgage, your mortgage payment is the floor. That's the minimum that you're going to pay. If you have any repairs, that's on top of. With rent, it's a ceiling. If you have repairs, whatever, it's the landlord's problem. You may have to hassle the landlord to get it taken care of, but they're going to charge you the same every month. Now, I will say, having been a renter 100 years ago, you can also kind of plan that your rent's going to go up every time your agreement comes up for renewal, but because they're kind of banking on you not wanting to move. So it's going to go up every year. But at least on a month-to-month basis, you don't have these big surprise like, oh, you need a new hot water heater. That's going to be a couple of $1,000. Oh, you're in the hospital and you can't take care of the lawn, and now you got to hire somebody to do it. So it reduces some of the hassle factor.
And it's amazing how stressful it can be in scenarios where you're used to doing everything, and for whatever reason suddenly you can't, and you have to figure out how to now pay and get other people to do all of your maintenance, or see it not getting done and feel like you're watching your home value decline in front of your very eyes. It's stressful. And the less of that kind of stress you can have later on in your life, the better. When you're younger and you come up against a bump on the road and you're still working, you can always say, I can earn my way out of this. Well, after you're retired, you may have the luxury of being able to just pick back up and go back to work, okay, and earn your way out of it. But most people don't. And most people don't for long in retirement. Your skills don't stay fresh so that someone still wants you after you've been out of the workforce for a few years.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing too that I see is a lot of times people say, well, I'm 45. I haven't started saving for retirement. It's too late for me. I'll just work forever. Like, you're assuming somebody will hire you forever. Even if you're willing to work forever, are you going to be able to work forever? If you are willing and able to work forever, is somebody going to hire you forever? It's not fair and it's not right, but ageism is a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And, especially once you've been, even look at stay-at-home moms, right? Stay-at-home mom might be 30, 35, and she can't get back in the workforce easily.
Pay
You
a
think you're going to do it at
huge
72?
penalty.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, you saying that you're going to work forever is not a strategy. I mean, because like so many things in life, it's not in our control, as as you just said, both because of ageism and because we don't know what's going to happen and we may not be able to.
Yeah. I've met a lady roughly my age. I think she was a couple years older, but this was not somebody that you would look at and think, oh, that's an old lady. So, late 40s, maybe early 50s. And I met her at Camp Phi, and she had been an engineer at Motorola and had an accident. I believe it was a car accident. I don't remember the details, but she was physically fine. She looked fine. She was able to carry on a conversation. But when she first came back to work, she just was not quite up at the same level where she had been. She was a little, not, again, to talk to her, you wouldn't think there's anything wrong, but just not as able to produce as much as quickly. And they kind of pushed her out. And I don't remember if I think she ended up taking a package and kind of early retiring. But it was this thing of, and luckily she was basically already 5. So she was kind of like, if you make it worth my while, I'll go. But, and again, technically, I'm pretty sure that's illegal to push somebody out of a job because they've had an accident. But these things happen all the time. So the more that you can do to kind of plan ahead. So here's one thing I just keep hearing this over and over again, and I think I know the answer, but I just want to talk about it. So I hear a lot of retired people who will say, well, I'm on a fixed income. Most employees are on a fixed income, at least until their annual review comes up. So I think what they really mean is I'm on a tight income. So what does that mean to you when somebody says, oh, I'm on a fixed income and therefore you shouldn't ask me to buy Girl Scout cookies? What's the big deal with I'm on a fixed income?
I do think that with retirees, what they're more likely to be referring to is probably absolutely it feels tight, but also that they don't have the option of increasing it. Do you know?
Or maybe even just the hope, right? Because a lot of employees, you're going to get paid what you get paid, at least until you get a review, but you have this delusion / hope / expectation.
Well, and if you're talking about people who are significantly older, and I remember this from when I was younger in the workforce, it used to be reasonable to expect that you were going to get pay raises every year. Okay. Now, I spent a time, the last, I don't know, I spent 8 years working in the community college system. The last 8 years I worked in the community college system here in North Carolina. I didn't have a raise. And didn't leave. But I do think that older people feel like people who are still in the workforce have more opportunities to increase their income, whether that means by moving somewhere else or just by getting raises. When you're retired, your Social Security, if you're collecting Social Security, is going to have inflation increases if there are inflation increases. If you're so lucky as to have a pension, most pensions don't. And so, maybe it felt generous when you retired, but 20 years down the road without inflation adjustments, depending on what's happened, the last 20 years haven't been that bad, but there have been periods of time where that would really have hurt you. Things feel tight. I think that that's what people are talking about. And our prospects make a big difference to how we look at the world.
Yeah.
And I do think that folks, particularly people who've retired at traditional age, are dealing with a fear that what I have may not last as long as I do.
Mm-hmm. And this is something that my parents have said before is like, well, we think we have enough, but who knows how long we're going to live.
It's just, that you had enough when you die.
Yeah.
And unfortunately for a lot of folks, that's going to motivate them to not to do the things that would really enhance their quality of life, particularly earlier in retirement when maybe they could travel or just engage in other, pastimes that would really be fun for them. because we're afraid we won't have enough to take care of ourselves when we get old. And that's just a shame.
Yeah, yeah. Well, now that we've got everybody good and depressed, let's see if we can shift the mood a little bit. Tell us, do you have any client, well, and let me ask first, are all of your clients still in the accumulation phase, or do you have clients who are retired?
Both.
Okay. So tell us about some happy retirees or some happy pre-retirees. Like, what are kind of the keys if we want to go into this? Obviously, having a lot of money probably helps. Let's be realistic. But what are some kind of keys to, you're like, that couple, they're doing it right. That guy, he's got the right idea.
Okay. So two things come to mind. And this, I think the same kinds of things make a difference whether you're retired or thinking about retirement. So one of a favorite client couple that I work with are so much fun to do retirement planning for, because they have this huge range of incomes on which they could be happy. And they'll say that, they're like, oh, well, we need 100,000 after tax, but we can live really well on 40,000 after tax. Like, okay, this is a huge target. You know, this is easy to hit. You can do a lot of different things, and they're still feeling like they're going to be happy. So flexibility can be key. And it's probably important that people have tested their flexibility earlier in their lives, so it's not theoretical. Okay. You know, and you know, I speak from experience, because I went from working in New York City and living in New York and making a lot of money to living on a small sailboat in the Caribbean making virtually nothing. And it was like, oh, I'm actually a lot happier now than I was before. So it's not necessarily the income or the ability to buy things and have a designer handbag. And, you know, I know from experience that those aren't the things that make a difference in my quality of life. Good to know that. If you've never tried it, you might speculate about that, but you want to know how flexible you are. The other thing, and this, again, will not be popular, I'd say Americans today are largely responsible for funding their own retirement, which is a change from previous generations where people, first of all, didn't live as long, and second of all, companies provided pensions. And most financial planners and advisors are very investment oriented, and we as human beings like to get the most for our money. And in the accumulation phase, that is awesome. Okay. Own lots of stock over long periods of time so you get the best possible returns on your retirement dollars. When you're approaching retirement, I believe you need to change the way you look at it. The folks who are the happiest are the ones who have a pension or Social Security or annuity income. I know that nasty word, annuity, that covers their essential expenses. And then they're not worried about outliving it, and they're not worried about having to sell from their portfolio when the market is down. So then your investment portfolio becomes the supplement that you use for your discretionary expenses. Those are the people who are having happy, peaceful retirements. But most financial planners don't want to recommend that their clients ever stop relying just on an investment portfolio to fund their lifestyle.
Well, and part of this goes back to, we as consumers need to think about, how does that person get paid? So the traditional asset under management model, my husband always jokes that it's like a dragon sitting on a big pile of gold. That advisor's job is to protect that big pile of gold from everybody, including you, because that's how they get paid. So for you to take, you know, $250,000 each out of their big pile of gold and buy an annuity that they didn't sell you, that represents a threat to their income. Now, most of them are ethical enough that if they truly believe that's the right thing, you know, they understand you're going to spend that portfolio down. But it goes back to, why am I getting this advice, and what other opinions can I get on this?
And I'll tell you that even folks who don't manage assets. So I'm part of the Garrett Planning Network, which is a network of folks who offer hourly accessible financial planning. The majority of these folks don't manage assets. A small percentage of them do that as a service for their clients. And still, the planners, for the most part, are very investment oriented, and so are lots of our clients. So I have clients where I've suggested, look, you have enough, okay, that while you might not maximize your returns, you could create for yourself a pension income that would take care of you, still have an equity portfolio left over for your discretionary stuff, and know that you're fixed for however long you live. But no, I don't want to give up the ability to get a stock market rate of return in order to have that satisfaction. When the flip side is, we're running, so financial advisors will run a Monte Carlo and tell you, there's a 90% chance that you're going to have enough assets to draw this every year and, to live to whatever your expected age is. Okay. Well, what about the 10% chance that you don't? Then you don't have enough money to live? Or what if you live longer than the expected age? The possibility of what's going to happen with that 10% where it doesn't work, to me, I give up some upside. Okay, so I'm not going to have the best returns during my retirement, but I've secured it. Do you know? It's not popular with anybody. It is with people who sell annuities, and probably, for folks with an insurance background, okay, because you have these two different sides. You've got the investment-oriented folks, and then you have the sort of safety-first folks who tend to be more insurance product-oriented. And what I would say is in retirement, most folks need a combination of both. If you've got loads of money, it doesn't matter. You're going to have enough to cover your essential expenses. Average people, we're not in that position where we can just not care and take on market risk for our entire retirements.
Yeah. Well, and this really goes back to, for us as the consumers, know thyself, and for you as the planner, let me get to know the client, because you've got to look at what they have, and you also have to take into consideration their risk tolerance. And I find most people's assessment of their own risk tolerance is very different depending upon what the market is doing. If you'd ask somebody, a year or two ago, how comfortable are you with risk? I love it. More risk, more money, more return. Yeah, totally.
We all love it in a bull market and not so happy with it in a bear market.
Exactly. So I would say if you're the kind of person who's like logging in and checking your balance, if it went down and you're freaking out, then just writing 100% stocks till end of days may not be the way to go. So you've got to really take into consideration a lot of different factors: your financial picture, your risk picture, tax picture, all of this, which is why, again, I like to partner with and refer to a lot of people, because I don't get into this kind of analysis. My real sweet spot is kind of helping people get on the path. So helping people understand you want to be on the right side of compound interest, right? You want to be earning it, not paying it. So you got to get out from under the credit cards, because they will just eat you up. The emergency fund, like we talked about, I encourage people to take advantage of their work retirement funds, especially if they're getting a match. I'm sorry, nothing that's like moral and legal and ethical is going to give you a better return, especially if you have a dollar for dollar match. Nobody's going to double your money. And if somebody tells you they are, they're a crook. Or it's super risky, right? Like there's nothing better out there than free money. So, kind of trying to get people on the path. But then when people start looking at, okay, we worked together, I'm on the path now, I need some detailed analysis around, I'll encourage them to start closing that gap. But if they're like, well, exactly how much do I need for retirement? And, what do I need to take into consideration? That's where somebody and you talked about some of the tools that you guys have access to that I suppose theoretically I could maybe pay to access it as a coach, but it's just not my wheelhouse. Like some of those Monte Carlo analysis, some of those kind of tools you have access to that most
I do, but honestly, and I'm an outlier here, I don't use the Monte Carlo analysis
Mm.
because I don't believe in that probability way of thinking.
Okay.
Okay. That, oh, under most scenarios you'd be okay. But whoopsie, the one you got doesn't work. And so instead, I do a lot more work with clients around what their flexibility is on what they're going to spend, and making sure that we've got their assets allocated, and hopefully that we can create a reliable stream of income that's going to cover their essential expenses for however long they live.
Well,
Because here's the thing, sequence of return risk, you guys ever talk about this? If you had retired February of this year, and you'd been saying, hey, look, we've had a bull market for years, I'm leaving all my money in the stock market, every month I'll just liquidate what I need for my monthly expenses, you would have been very unhappy in March. And, you know, investing in the stock market is a great thing to do when you've got long periods of time. But in order for it to work for you, you have to be able to leave your investments there when the market's down so they can recover however long that takes. Having to sell stuff every year, so retiring and then having a really crappy first year and having to liquidate part of your portfolio anyway, is something that retirees can never recover from. So I never want to encourage folks to be in that position. That's too risky for anyone. You know, there are different ways folks go about doing this. I know you've heard people talk about their bucket strategies, this, that, and the other thing. Most of the clients I work with want peace of mind, and they don't want to have to spend a ton of time thinking about it or tweaking it. That argues against things like a bucket strategy and makes it much more palatable to say, well, I'm going to wait to take my Social Security, and that's going to cover a lot of my regular expenses. I've got a small pension, and then the rest of my portfolio can just be to supplement.
Yeah. Well, and you said this kind of in passing, but I think it's probably one of the most important factors that I don't think really anybody is talking about, is when you talked about that ability to be happy at different lifestyle levels, because the people I see that get in the most stressful and the yuckiest situations are the ones that are trying to hold on. And I see this a lot. I'm Gen X. I see this a lot with Gen X, is right. We come out and we get to this certain level and we think, this is my set point. This is where I belong. Yeah. And then the market has a downturn. And so what do? Instead of admitting, maybe this is the new set point, we keep trying to maintain this level of, you know, same house, same cars, same lifestyle. And so we say, no problem, I'll use my emergency fund. I'll borrow against my 401k. I'll cash out my 401k. Well, now the economy comes back up. You're back at your set point, but you're not above your set point. So you're spending everything you make. So you have a hard time replenishing. You have a hard time saving. So, and this is what my husband and I did. This is what we talk about. That was kind of our radical change, is we just kind of said, screw it. Get rid of the house, get rid of the truck, get rid of the SUV, move to the unfashionable side of town into a smaller house. Sharing the car. And because of that, we were able to keep investing while the market was down, keep maxing out those retirement accounts. Then we had this huge bull run and we were like, holy cow. Okay, now we're in a somewhat work optional space. I say somewhat because I don't think we could maintain this house without working. But, you know, if we're talking like van down by the river, we would never have to work again. But that's only because we chose to downgrade our lifestyle. Whereas most people, they hang on. And these are the people that I see that are the most unhappy, is the people. I talked to a guy probably a year and a half ago who was an older guy who had been making a lot of money in IT. He got pushed out. He was having trouble finding another job. I think partly because he had a little bit of kind of diva syndrome about how wonderful he was. And so he only wanted like this prime opportunity instead of the opportunities that were available. And he was just spending all of his money to maintain the lifestyle. It's like yeah, I don't ever want to tell somebody like, you got to lower your standards. It's not great advice in dating, but you know, you can be happy. And this is the thing that I think has been sold to us as Americans, is like happiness comes from the things we can buy. Whereas if we're really being honest and reflecting on our core values, it's things like, our family, our friends, our relationships, maybe experiences and travel. So we have to kind of, this is one thing I do encourage my clients to do, is look at your values and then look at your spending. And, would somebody know from looking at your online banking what's important to you in life? Probably not. So, let's kind of reevaluate and then see if that shifts your spending.
Unfortunately, you put your finger on one of the real problems I think we have as Americans, which is we equate our self-worth with the things we own and with our income.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to be willing to decouple from that, to be willing to ratchet your lifestyle down if need be. The happiest people that I know and who I work with are ones who can happily and willingly live below their income level.
Yeah.
Okay. Because that leaves them with a margin for error. But you have to realize that I'm not the car I drive. And guess what? Nobody else is even looking. And if somebody is and says, wow, why are you driving that old beater instead of, I remember you had that really hot BMW. Well, you know what? That's not about my value as a human being. But you're right. If you won't let go of it, and hey, the more expensive your lifestyle, the longer you need to work and the more you need to save. If you are happier with a simpler lifestyle, then you'll get to financial independence and be able to decide what kind of work you want to do and if you want to work for money much earlier in your life.
Yeah. And I'm not against stuff. I'm not against money. I like to be a little bougie every now and again. So I always joke that money can't buy happiness, but it does make a good down payment.
It's important for folks to know what the things are that are important to them.
Yes.
And absolutely, you should spend money. You should put resources into those things, but forget about what other people think or what society says. I've never had a fancy house because I don't care. And we like smaller places, and so thank goodness it saved me a load of money. Do I feel deprived? I don't. I look at big houses. I'm like, cool. I got a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house and half of it we never even use. So I would love to have half of it go away.
Yeah. Well, and it's like you were saying, it's just kind of a matter of reflecting on what's actually important to me and, my partner and my family. What do I really care about? And then lining up with that. So I know we are a little bit over time, so we probably ought to wrap up. Can you tell folks how to get in touch with you if they want more information, maybe need some help?
Sure. I would be happy to chat with anyone who has more questions. My website is fairwindsadvice.com. Okay. And that's the best way to get a hold of me.
All right. And those for you who have found us on YouTube or elsewhere on the internet, if you enjoy these kind of conversations, you want to hear more about this sort of stuff, you can join me in the Money Club on Facebook. You can just go to Facebook and search Money Club with Lisa Duke, or you can take the shortcut via my website, lisaduke.net/moneyclub. And if anybody is looking to get started with financial coaching for the month of August, I've got some specials running, some bonuses and promotions and things like that. So if you want to learn more about that, lisaduke.net schedule will get you to my calendar and we can go ahead and talk about options for working together. And with that being said, I will wish everyone a good night and talk to you later.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.